Okay, thank you again for inviting me for this speech, a very important speech, 40 years, a milestone, and I'm happy as well that I was sitting in this classroom for a couple of years, maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more. I'm going to try to be brief, and I'm supposed to be speaking on mining, and I was thinking not only to bring you our perspective on mining from Peru, although it's going to be the case study, but as well giving you a little bit of insights from other countries in Latin America. So, so the content of my presentation is going to be giving you an overview of Latin America. Then we're going to go to the case study in Peru, a little bit of insight into the formalization process, and then where do we go from there in order to kind of like get feedbacks afterwards as well and a discussion. What is at stake here? Well, we all know you have been reading the readings for this week. The price of gold is kind of like the major aspect here. Since the last recession in 2008, the prices of gold has been rising from the beginning of the 2000s, so from 250 to almost even more than 1,300 per ounce in 2013, and now it's even more skyrocketing. So what does that mean? That meant that the imports for mercury were rising as well, and it meant as well that mining areas were rising as well. And this is specifically now from a reading for a case study in Peru, but this has implications as well for all of the countries in Latin America. And I'm going to focus especially on, don't get anxious about this table, but I think it's very important to get kind of like information on the table on the different countries. What got my attention was the transformation of small-scale mining, and as well the loss of identity of the small-scale mining in different countries in Latin America, and how they changed as well in the last 10 years, especially in the last 5, and with the history in the last 20 years. So let's see, for example, in Colombia. In Colombia, the mining, the traditional, long-standing, small-scale mining was being overthrown by the presence of large mining companies, especially because of the more stable conditions in the rural areas. But this was not kind of like for a long time, because a lot of the former FARC activities, former FARC regions, they were actually taking over as well the areas of small-scale mining, and that meant as well a lot of corruption and a lot of kind of like increased contested areas as well. So what is very peculiar in Colombia is that in Colombia, small-scale mining was kind of like a way of living. It was part of the livelihood activities of the people that lived there for the past 50 years. In other countries, for example, if we go now to Peru, Peru has a long history of very large traditional mining. So in this case, for example, these large traditional mining activities that they had like a lot of incentives from the government, and they could build up like kind of like an environment of corruption among them. So once the small scale mining were starting to rise, especially in the region of Madre de Dios, they kind of didn't know how to handle that in terms of the regulations and the formalizations, because they were basically into dealing with this large scale mining. So the history and as well the transformation here is much more different. So in Suriname, for example, we have as well small scale mining as well as kind of like very important for the economy, and as well had a lot of tradition, and as well is still based on customary laws, which, for example, this is part of the adapted from the gold mining in the cases of Bolívar, Brazil, Colombia, Suriname. And what caught my attention here is that, for example, in Suriname, like they don't have much conflicts there because the mining activities are kind of like based on their customary laws, but those are being lost as well. So on the other side, in Brazil, there is this long-standing tradition as well of small-scale mining, and they have had this garimpo system for the longest time. And the mechanism to try to enforce kind of like the application of laws in those areas, kind of like the law of the garimpo, has kind of not been able to, like, it didn't happen. So most of those regions, like from the small scale mining, they remain, the laws and the regulations, they remain guided by the garimpo, the law of the garimpo. And a lot of other countries actually have taken as well the law of the garimpos as an example. And the impact for all of these, in all of these countries, is kind of like the same. Increased environmental damages, increased health risk. And the only thing is that in other countries, it's more part of the economic and social and political life than in others. For example, as I mentioned in Colombia, it is part of kind of like the social and political life. And on the other side of Peru, it's not. In Bolivia, it's a very interesting case as well, because the gold mining is most of the time organized by this kind of like cooperatives. The cooperatives, they play like the big role. They're kind of like the one that organize as well, regulate, and it's very much part as well of the social and the political life. So I thought it was important for you to get kind of like even though it's very not very general and not very detailed, but to give you kind of like an idea of some kind of major issues in comparison between the countries. So let's see exactly what's happening in Peru. In Peru, I'm going to be talking basically on the artisanal and small scale mining, ASM, in the case of Madre de Dios, which I'm sure after you have been reading the readings for this week, you have been seeing a lot of, I'm sure, a lot of satellite images and changes in satellite images. This is just to give you more enough an idea of how the mining activities has been changing, for example, from 1 year and from, this is September 2016 and October 2017, November 2016, October 2017. So it's changing in a very rapid way. And right now, deforestation for gold mining in Madre de Dios and Peru exceeds all other forms of forest loss, combined as well, which includes ranching, agriculture, and logging. So it's a huge devastation, and especially as well, what is at stake is the river-based mining. And what is at stake are those kind of like small clandestine operations that right now like comprise more than half of all gold mining activities. And statistically, it's kind of almost impossible to have a real number of how many small clandestine mining activities are actually functioning. And besides the environmental problems, there is social impacts, social problems, a lot of human trafficking, child prostitution, and as well deforestation, creating empty forests, and impaired ecological function for the forest and as well the water forest. And health problems, mercury pollution, air, soil, waters throughout all the rivers of Madre de Dios. Almost 80% of all residents in Madre de Dios have some kind of levels of mercury. And as well in terms of the fish, this is the mota, one of the most kind of like fish being used as well by the local populations, eaten. That's kind of almost 60% is contaminated mercury. And there was as well a study done by an institution in Madre de Dios. They were trying to find out how many parts per million indigenous communities had that were kind of like not a little bit far away from where all these mining activities are being held in Manu, in the Manu National Park, and they found that one community had 27 parts per million in their bodies, and the one allowed for anybody is 1 part per million. So, and this is kind of like far away. So this can give us an idea of what is at stake, and that there is no really like a lot of statistics going on and a lot of studies of what the impact for health and as well for environment. What is always at stake? The stake is how to classify the mining activities. And in Peru, this has been a big issue because since past 50 years, 60 years, mining activities, as I was mentioning, has always been part of this large scale and medium scale activities. But right now, what we have to look into is what is the aspect of the small scale and the artisanal activities. And small scale are all usually organized by 10 or more individuals, and they have an area of 10,000 to 1,000 to 2,000 hectares. It can be sometimes less. And they're organized as well in small groups. Sometimes there are like 2 or more people working for them. And I'm gonna give you like as well another like data of how this works. So from those small scale miners, we have a miner can have like different hats. For example, a miner can hold legally a title of an area. He like for a couple of years or in the process of actually getting the claim as well. A miner can have been living in a different concession, doing different other activities, for example, having legal claims for protected areas, if it's, for example, in indigenous communities, or as well have like legal claims for a territory where they do some agricultural activities, or they can have like be part of like a timber concession and having like legal claims forestry concession. But at the same time, they can have as well areas where they do mining activities. So they then on the other side, they can or they cannot have they cannot be owners of all the tools and supplies they need for mining. So what they do, they kind of rent the technical equipment that they need. They sometimes go and mine in areas where they have legal claims, or what they do a lot is they have a lot of invitees, and the invitees, they have to pay royalties in order to be able to get the deals of the mining activities. So what I mean is that a miner can have like completely different heads depending on where they are. But the problem right now in Peru are that these invitees are kind of like the ones that come on a daily basis to the region of Madre de Dios. And they, of course, sometimes are invitees from maybe somebody who has a claim in an agricultural lands or a forestry concession or even a Brazilian concession, but they want to do some mining activities there as well. And these are the ones that are kind of like the uncontrollable mining activities, and as well the ones that will never ever have legal concessions or legal permits. So the government within 2012, they started kind of like a legalization process, which ended in 2016, and they tried kind of like to formalize this is the so-called mining corridor, okay? But out of the uh, the claims that were that they got, only 1% got actually the legal permits, and because of a lot of problems that they had as well. As you see, there is as well like a lot of other kind of like extractive activities going on along the corridor here. The mining corridor is in brown, but you see that around the mining corridor you will have tidal agricultural land, natural reserves, protected areas, Brazilian concessions. And what is right now a big problem is this area here of the Reserva Nacional of Tamopata, because a lot of mining activities are actually starting here. And of course, this is kind of illegal, but it's very tempting for the miners, because along the mining corridor, like the daily yield per hectare would be per day is between 12 to 18 grams per gold. In these areas in the corridor, in the buffer zone, you will yield like between 60 and 80 grams per day. But in the national Tamopata, you will yield from 150 to 200 grams per day. So this is kind of like where everybody wants to be.
What are these yields?
Daily yields
But
per gold or gold.
I understand, but for like how big is the company or how many people?
Just one person.
One person.
Yeah. So of course everybody wants to come here and not be in the other side. Work. The law of deformalization then was based on a proposal that involved kind of like the informal economy. So the government, they tried to use the same concept for formalizing any other informal economy, and it was based on monitoring and auditing, on the simplification of the administration, and as well on the formalization process in itself, granting permission, granting land rights, and as well in technical assistance. But what they forgot is kind of like the land management issue. Kind of like that was kind of like the major aspect that failed as well. Why this process between 2012 and 2016 failed? Because they did not incorporate, for example, the superposition with other extractive activities as well, and the land management as well, the formalization as well being based on social, productive, and geographical features of in the scale of the mining. So because of the absence of this territorial planning activity policy, it has not favored kind of like the small mining activities, and there is not much kind of like prospect that this is going to change in the future. And on the other side, on a daily basis, there are kind of like more invitees arriving and arriving and arriving, kind of like different places. And sometimes the people who come who are not from Madre de Dios, they don't even know that they're in a protected area. They just happen to be there because they're being sent there. And so they're basically uneducated and they just want to have a better living. But there has been a study that just came out in sustainability in this year, a couple of months ago, which actually compared the incomes in Peru and Madre de Dios between three activities: Brazil nut, fish farming, and informal mining. And it actually gives us an impression, it gives us kind of like information that if there would be kind of like more of a push into giving this informal mining more activities into, for example, fish farming or Brazil nuts, that they would actually yield almost the same. And when I was reading this article, I was kind of thinking, well, it's very hard kind of like to make them change, and it's kind of like a different activity as well. But always kind of like the idea that mining brings you a lot of earnings is not always kind of like what is happening on the ground.
That's a question, Andrea. And so is that net income or kind of gross income? That include if you have to rent equipment, then you're going to have to pay for that equipment. Do you know if they incorporated?
Yes,
that?
they did incorporate that. They did incorporate
So
kind of
that's-
like all the
it's
initial
net.
kind of like.
So it's net income.
Yes.
Wow.
Because usually as well, when you do mining, you have to pay royalties as well for the equipment. And usually when you do kind of like the mining, you start the mining, you don't get any money after maybe 2 months or 3 months because of all the royalties that you have to pay. And so, in other words, there is kind of like there is something that we can do. It's in terms of giving kind of like another alternatives, activities, economies in the area. That's kind of like my take on it. But what else to do? I put some points that maybe it's good that we can discuss it later on. Would it be good to de-emphasize the use of gold as a financial commodity, which happened kind of like since 2008, the recession and before? Enforce more of the regulation of resource use, and as well have more kind of like better enforcement policies for land use rights, and as well share data between the different state institutions for activities, for example, so that mining is not overlapping in the protected areas, or mining is not overlapping kind of like timber concessions as well. And I think what is very important is to regulate mercury's import as well for all this unregulated mining. And then what to do in terms of weak governance, because as I was telling you, like for the government, small mining is although it produces right now almost more than 20% of all the yearly yields for kind of like all the group of minings. They want to have more of, they want to kind of like deal their activities and with the bigger mining companies. So kind of like still the weak governance is going to happen until the government has a real kind of like interest in the regulation of the small mining, because that's not really in their agenda. And this is kind of like the discussion for the group, which is part of the questions that you all kind of like received as well. So I'm not going to go through this as well. If you want to have more information on what's happening in gold, like the situation of gold mining, I would suggest kind of like watch the Amazon Gold documentary, which is really, it impacts you and it gives you kind of like information on the social level and on the kind of like environmental level. It's kind of sad. And then there are like some new publications from SFDA, Sociedad Peruana de Derecho Ambiental, kind of like very good studies, and where my presentation has been based on this as well. And I'm happy to share the information, this presentation, and all the references are as well in the back of the presentations. I have completed.